of the World Economic Forum here in the Swiss Alps, and it has attracted a number of political heavyweights that are going to be in attendance. Everyone from Theresa May to Macron, Merkel, Justin Trudeau, and surprisingly enough, Donald Trump. He has a speech scheduled for later this week that is much anticipated, and it will make him the second U.S. president to ever attend Davos, the first being Bill Clinton back in 2000. Now, an ill-timed government shutdown back at home did put his trip under question for a little while, but things are back on track at this point. Of course, many are very curious about how his America First mantra will actually fit in with the globalist atmosphere that the forum boasts, although no one's really expecting him to conform to that. This year in general is shaping up to be a whole new Davos, with the politics of the last year creeping in and the economic focus being a bit blurred. First of all, this is the first year ever that the summit is chaired by only women, and a number of the discussions really don't seem to have much of an economic focus at all, discussing things like race, privilege, and sexual harassment. The hottest trends of 2017, of course. And VIP guests are not the only thing descending on Davos. The past few days have seen almost 2 meters of snowfall, leaving a lot of concerns in its wake. The local authorities have warned of the possibility of avalanches. The helipad in Davos was closed down for a few hours, leaving the question of how the leaders are going to get to the forum. Perhaps we'll see them all on skis.
Davos reality, economic, environmental, social and political fragility. In avalanche territory, a loud noise can bring the whole mountain down. And Donald Trump comes to town on Friday.
Turns out Davos is actually this social experiment when you gather a bunch of VVIPs, then make them carry their own luggage through the snow and stand in lines with each other. Elbows are out.
Wonder what would happen if Davos got snowed in and no one could leave for a week, and the world realised that it could run itself without the business and political elite.
So we come to Davos, snowed in. We can only hope that the abominable snowman is real, and that he will attack all of these scumbags. Now, if you saw the analysis that I gave of the book by Malachi Martin, Keys of This Blood, you'll recall that there was a Davos section. So I want to look at a little bit of that just because he was an insider. Malachi Martin is not a great authority, not somebody who's reliable, but we can gain information from his book, as I said, much in the same way as we gained information from Tragedy and Hope. You know, both of these men were professing Catholics. Malachi Martin at one time was a Jesuit, left that order and did whatever he did and of course supported all of the changes at Vatican II. So we're not going to get into Malachi Martin, but he did mention in this important book the importance of Davos. Now, why does Davos matter? Well, because the heads of banking and finance meet here, and all the way back to the 80s and 90s, the Vatican had an interest, of course, in Davos. And it's interesting that Soviets and Soviet delegates were meeting with everyone at Davos back in the 80s and 90s. So this is not really a party system. This is a corporate globalist system. And you think, well, now if it's a capitalist, why would Soviets be going there? We'll see. That doesn't matter at this level. Now these are the puppet characters like Trudeau, as you see here, are meeting to, give their BS that they give every year. And what did we hear was the focus of this year's Davos? All of the multicultural, feminist, women's racial crap that we've been force-fed and told we need to feel bad for so long. The hot button issues of 2017 are now the focus of Davos. So the World Economic Forum is meeting to deal with social justice warrior issues. So when you wonder why there are social justice warriors everywhere at the universities, and you start to think that it's Marxists and communists, you need only look to Davos, to the billionaires and the corporate elite at Davos, right? The bankers at Davos, who are having their puppet men, political class here come speak And as a result, they are giving the marching orders to the people that actually run the social justice warriors. The World Bank and finance have its greats at Davos. The Federal Reserve, the World Bank head, the Bundesbank, the finance minister of Germany, all of the CEOs of the big corporations. This is what Malachi Martin is explaining about it. And he goes on to say, for the papacy, the lesson to be learned at Davos is the confirmation of the analysis that had been given before, which is that in the 80s and 90s, globalists at that time had been starkly realistic. They all claimed to be globalist, and they were committed to globalism. For many of them, he says, some people were frozen at the idea of Eastern Orthodoxy. That's interesting. I'm wondering why. He's not saying globalists or Eastern Orthodox. He's saying they were worried with this idea. They were worried with the ideas of being Chinese, of being Jewish, of being Japanese. And he said the globalism of these people was merely regionalism, provincialism. And he says that they couldn't understand and they don't have the power to reach globally like the Roman Catholic Church does. And that's why it has a much better stake at ruling the new global world. So something like, Chinese interests don't have, because they're limited just by the fact of being Chinese, shows that it's not capable really of governing the world in the way that you could have that potential in the Roman Catholic Church. So he goes on to talk about Gorbachev and a bunch of this, 80s, 90s Cold War stuff. But again, this is an example of Soviet delegates and big capitalists coming and meeting at this summit, which shows you planned dialectics. The people at this level are not actually in opposition to one another. He says the circle of the nations, or what we might call the grand design, which was pioneered by Gorbachev in the USSR, stands on the edge of an abyss. He says that he's talking about in the 80s and 90s, and he's actually talking about the collapse of the USSR, which Gorbachev helped promote and helped loot Russia ultimately when you get to the characters of Yeltsin. Now he goes on to say, at Davos, the participants already contemplated the idea of a concentric circles around the grand design. This is a concept that he continually mentions in the book. So what he's getting at is that what you have at Davos is outer circles of people, a Gorbachev, a Trudeau. They are not the inner circle, the inner party. They're not the wise men of the West that he talks about in this book. The John J. McCloys, the Brzezinskis, the Kissingers. Those are the wise men of the West. Henry Stimson. These are the outer circle people. So isn't it interesting that Malachi Martin has the exact same description as Carroll Quigley does of the real power structure. And he talks about them meeting to determine the future century of geopolitical Earth. So there you go. So Davos is important. It does matter. You might see it in a way like Bilderberg, except that Davos tends to be maybe a little more celebrity marked. You have Angelina Jolie and different. Somebody was talking about some actor. I don't remember who. I think Kevin Spacey was elected King of Davos last year. I think that's right. Somebody mentioned that. I think I looked it up. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true. So there you go. So Davos is a little more maybe outer circle political and financial elite. but not necessarily the most powerful men on the planet. And he talks about something like the EU is a perfect example of the ideas of Davos and the World Economic Forum. The EU represents the kind of organizational structure that Davos would like to see everywhere. And that's why you can sense the animosity that they would have towards someone like Trump. Now, Trump, as we said, is a contradictory figure because he claims that he's going to go there to promote Americanism. But Americanism is an older form of globalism. And so the people that you're seeing here, Justin Trudeau and these different globalists, and Bono and these idiots who've been, longtime staples of Davos, they're just a further down the spiral progression of what the globalist is beyond Americanism. Americanism is a thing that worked, during World War II and during the Cold War. But now you'll notice all the same power structure that utilized Americanism has been dropped and dumped. Right? America as an idea can be shed like old skin for the real serpent to emerge, and that is globalism. At Davos, for the first time, a representative group of the Society of All Nations peeked through the traditional limits of international politics. So he's saying that actually at Davos you have one of the first truly international power block meetings. Now, Bilderberg could count in a way, but actually several groups have been either not present or not invited to Bilderberg. It's a little bit different at Davos in that you have a wider, representation of people. At Davos, you have a few thousand people, and Bilderberg is a smaller venue. A few hundred, I guess. So this is again outer ring, and he goes on to say. The outlines of the present New World Order and the grand design were given in terms of its most realistic modern version at Davos, he says. He says, when the delegates that year of I think he's talking about 1990. Yeah, 1990. When they departed that year, they had all taken very important proximal steps toward the stated goal of a new world order. And he talks about the eventual integration of other states into something like the EU is this grand design. And he says that in a way you could look to Marxism-Leninism as a version or a type of this. But although Martin wants us to get caught up in Cold War gobbledygook because that's what that's one of the propaganda aspects of this book. But even he kind of admits that the globalism that we're going into, this Leninist Marxist ideal, is corporate. It's a corporate banking socialism. And he goes on to talk about the possibility of the Catholic Church becoming the globalist monstrosity that could actually run the world. Now let's look at a couple more quotes here from Martin that are very telling, and then we'll be done with this goofball. Many observers surmise with the election of John Paul II in 1978 that the first thing Papa Wojtyła would do, and possibly the only chief thing that he would do, would be to attempt to revive Catholicism in Europe. Such a thing might be expected from a Pole of Catholic Poland. They expected a crusade on the part of John Paul. There was not one. Instead, he launched his papal career in a totally different direction. At first, it was misunderstood, and then it was explained away, and now he's writing this again in the 90s, and now it has begun to draw on all of this that it is a geopolitical strategy that this pope is dominated by. He is walking on a geopolitical plane with geopolitical goals. So John Paul II is an agent of globalism. He's an agent of the grand design, according to Martin. He is not interested in eternity and spiritual realities. That's Malachi Martin saying that. That's not me. Now, he goes on and he says, John Paul II never undertook a crusade for the re-Christianization of Europe because he was more interested in the decadent structure of his church. Oh, I'm sure he was. He helped promote that. Europe was beyond the reach of being re-Christianized. What? Reform of his church could not be achieved by the normal ecclesiastical means, and so he didn't do anything. This is what Martin says. It's not me saying this. He tackled none of these. What is more difficult for most people to understand is his reason for not tackling any of the problems. Yeah, because he's a fucking evil dude. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's the root of this. And Martin admits that, by the way. He says, well, yeah, he's a good guy deep down, but he's also evil. Well, that's a double thing. So, as could be expected, he says, John Paul was focused on geopolitical realities. Now, how do we understand that? Well, we understand that by what we see in John Courtney Murray, Time, Life, and the American Proposition by David Wimhoff, that the Roman Catholic Church has, since the Cold War, really been a tool of Americanism. And that's really what John Paul is participating in. It has nothing to do with returning to the church fathers or any of this pious talk. It's about geopolitical power moves. And isn't it amazing that here's this whole book saying that? Right? I mean, what did Dostoevsky say in Grand Inquisitor? He predicted the very thing that Malachi Martin is admitting, that the papacy would become obsessed with worldly power concerns. He goes on to say that John Paul II was perfect for this role because of his history of Polishness, and he says when you go back to the Piast Pacts of Poland, they were some of the first to allow religious liberty. And he says that this is in part because of the influence of Jewish thought in Poland back in the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages. So Davos represents, and this is the key page here on Davos, and we'll be done with this character. I apologize for having to go to Malachi Martin. He's a stink bomb. The plans of the New World Order and for Western Europe and the United States depended on the evolution of the Soviet states. He goes on to talk about Fatima and Russia and the dismantling of Russia, and that all of this was a Western plot, which is what I've been talking about for so long, right? All the stuff with the Cold War, dismantling of the Soviet satellites, and bankrupting of Russia in the 90s. This is what Martin is talking about in this section. This is page 655. He goes on to say that hence John Paul II's lament for Europe was a full lament from the Atlantic to the Urals. Quite clearly, in the minds of the most ardent exponents of Davos, Europe in their dreams and projections is not a Europe with any kind of faith. Exactly. The new Europe is summed up as the greater economic space of Europe. Helmut Kohl at Davos defined its scope and purpose was to achieve what he called the Jeffersonian goal. But no one would ascribe to Thomas Jefferson and his early American compatriots the interpretation that the strained interpretation that Cole and his fellow Europeanizers put upon the words of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it's all about money. Mammon. The mammon god is what they worship. For they have their own interpretation at Davos, and it has no tincture of Christianity or anything like it, and not even a breath of the vague deism that Jefferson had. Exactly. On the lips of the modern builders of Europe, the pursuit of life is the pursuit of a greater gross national product for the EU, and all goods that can be purchased through consumerism. Liberty is the freedom to do whatever one wants. Happiness is the condition of being protected against poverty, total surveillance, security, and all this sophisticated technology. In principle, this is the Leninist Marxist promise, and it goes even further. Right. And who's running all this? Commies? No. You say, well, wait a minute. Justin Trudeau's dad was a commie or whatever. Yeah. And he's at the World Economic Forum hosted by billionaire bankers who have always run communism. So even Martin admits this, right? In this propaganda Cold War garbage book, he's admitting that this is a plot of people above the Marxist capitalist dialectic, the super rich. And he says, what is this grand design about all this? And he says it is the exaltation of man. He said it is the apotheosis of man. It is a Nietzschean attempt to sort of step in and take over evolution. Yeah, that's pretty much everything that Jay's analysis has said for however long I've been analysisizing. Okay, so let's look at a couple more things from modern Davos now that we have this dubious insiders accurate. That's actually true, though. I mean, I think we can kind of sense that what Martin's saying there is completely accurate as it pertains to Davos, 100% on. So Davos kind of represents, again, a more forceful step towards globalism in a way because it is kind of the managerial class of the elite, right? The outer ring of 2,000-3,000 servants, the kind of thing that Quigley talked about in the Tragedy and Hope talks that we covered. And in a way, you could see Bilderberg as more of the inner ring, although still not necessarily the top people. So the inner ring, right? This would be Rockefellers, Rothschilds, the Kissingers, the Brzezinskis, the wise men. Okay, outer ring would be the 2,000 to 3,000 helpers that Quigley talked about, Royal Society and World Economic Forum people, United Nations people, right? Bureaucrat, managerial class, Justin Trudeau's, et cetera, et cetera. So that is what Davos represents. And what is interesting, as I mentioned in the first half, free half of this discussion, was that really Americanism is globalism. So I don't exactly know how Trump is going to bring some kind of firestorm to this because he's already like half of it, halfway in the doorway of globalism, and the other half is attempting to be nationalism. And I think he even said this during the campaign. Didn't he one time say something like, I support globalism and nationalism, which two things don't make sense. And globalism is fundamentally anti-nation, anti-people, of course, unless you're a certain select class of people. For everyone else, it's blend everything, gay rights, trannies, pedophilia, basically everything disgusting for the masses, for all the other people groups, And then for the bureaucratic elite Fabian socialist class, it's, living good. Now, just a couple of the reports that I wanted to highlight and documents coming from Davos that give you an idea of what kind of crap you're talking about here. This is an IBM report in concert with Davos, and it's about the Internet of Things and smart meters and the smart grid. And what is the IoT and why does it matter? Well, the Internet of Things is going to alter transportation because telemetry data, traffic routing, platooning, shipping, parking, insurance adjustments are all very soon going to be automated and controlled by AI. Smart cities, which I've been talking about for a while now, are going to be implemented where everything is going to be tracked, surveillance. Here you go. The smart cities are all about surveillance. The smart grid in the cities, everything will be run by AI. Welcome to the rise of machines. Healthcare, your healthcare is going to be determined by AI. And then your power consumption, your lighting, and your security are all going to be determined based on carbon and rationing. Here you have it. This is all coming in what they're calling the fourth industrial revolution, total technocracy. And it is the Boston Consulting Group with Hewlett-Packard. Excuse me, I said IBM. I meant Hewlett-Packard. Advancing cyber resilience principles and tools for boards. And this is the World Economic Forum. Now, what does the World Economic Forum promote? Everything social justice warrior, everything globalist, everything depopulation, everything anti-human, everything technocrat, everything that I've talked about for so long. And isn't it interesting that all of this social justice warrior stuff that Davos is right now talking about, right? What did we just hear? That the whole focus of Davos this year is social justice garbage. It's in concert with technocracy. Social justice is in concert with technocracy. So people are being re-educated is basically what all of this is. To accept a technocracy, which is what I've been talking about for so long. That's what my video on NEOM is about. Go watch the NEOM video. Exact same thing. And again, all of these white papers, policy papers, they just publicly put it all out and they say exactly what this is all for. But to get to these stages, they have to re-engineer people. They have to socially re-engineer people away from, guess what? Nationalism, populism, and traditional ideas. And let's look at another one of the Davos documents that shows that. This one is funny just because it's so brazen. You would think that leaders are elected to lead their population, their people. That's what populism means. And this title sounds, very self-helpy. It's got this image of a guy mountaineering, and you think that there's going to be some, phraseology that you'll see this over a toilet somewhere in a corporate setting telling you to, strive for excellence or some crap like that. What does this article actually say? It says, this is great. We must lead by example, blah, blah, blah. Basically, he says, use a bunch of tricks and tactics to make yourself look like you're a man of the people. And then he goes on to conclude by saying, I can think of no better antidote against populism than pretending to be a man of the people. This is directly from the World Economic Forum Davos website. I just got a kick out of that. You don't have to go into white papers and searching for some arcane, document about smart grids or some crap like that. Here's just this basic, practical article about how to trick people into thinking that you represent the people and then this will solve the problem of populism. Now, I could go through and we could watch this whole hour-long talk, but I can tell you that you and I probably already know what they're going to say. What are the great risks that have to be solved, the crises that the World Economic Forum meets to purportedly solve? Well, it's things like income disparity between men and women, which has been debunked a million times over. It's racial strife, which translates into all the evil white people are the problem, not enough migrants. It's climate change, which translates into too many people, too much population still. We got to kill people, get them out of here. It translates into cybersecurity, i.e., too many people are freely talking about globalism and right-wing issues on the internet that we have to stop. Economic strains and geopolitical tensions. This is people not going along with the New World Order. And their series is called Future Shocks. And isn't that interesting? Because that's exactly what Alvin Toffler titled his book, where he outlines globalism. So they say that there's all these crises. The crises are all the people that oppose them. This is how it always goes. And there will be more crises, right, problem, reaction, solution, to deal with the opponents of globalism. Now, some other articles were saying, let's see, where is it? Globalism has slowed. I'm not sure about that, but this one points out that this is the world's biggest party for globalist elites. And Trump is going, which again I think is very comical, but it even points out that American presidents don't usually do Davos. Clinton, of course, went. I can't imagine why Obama wouldn't have gone, but it's not that this is necessarily the Illuminati, party or something like that. This is, again, just another one of these publicized elite meetings where just more social engineering goes on. In other words, Davos itself is kind of a social engineering, as Malachi Martin was talking about. So I don't expect necessarily there to be anything tremendously important about Trump speaking there. I hope that maybe globalism is slowing. That's what a lot of the articles are saying, is that they're not exactly getting everything they want as soon as they want. So anyway, the answer, though, I think, and this is the crucial point that I was trying to get across in my talk, my analysis of this, Jay's analysis, is that Americanism is globalism. And Americanism is itself a philosophy of two conflicting ideologies. Of, on the one hand, religious liberty, our starting founding principle, is one in which relativism is still the norm. At the same time as attempting to retain ideas like nationalism, ideas like private property, the rights of the individual, things that really only make sense in a Christian worldview. So there's two competing systems of thought that are even kind of evident in the founding fathers themselves. People like Jefferson, who was in many ways an Illuminist, or Franklin, the Satanist, versus other individuals who had some explicit form of Christianity. I guess maybe you could argue John Quincy Adams or something like that. I don't know. And then maybe some of the Catholic guys like the Carrolls. But I don't think that any of those guys are really consistent. I'm just saying that the attempt at an Enlightenment experiment is itself a manifestation, a great example of two contradictory positions that eventually work themselves out in one or two directions. And America, unfortunately, went away from the path of Christianity, even though it was a very deformed, defective version of Christianity, towards something even worse, which nowadays is postmodern imperium, the liberal imperium of globalism. So it will be interesting to see what Trump says here. But Davos is a great example in the final analysis of globalism. As Martin pointed out accurately, it's one of the key modern examples of global government. It's not completely here, but it is one of the important entities attempting to move us to the stage of total global government. And there are others, as we said, Bilderberg and so forth. But that is what Davos is. And, every year. And look, if they're making Kevin Spacey king of Davos, let's see if that's true. Let me find that article. Yes, I was correct. Kevin Spacey is the king of Davos. Leonardo DiCaprio grabbed headlines of the World Economic Forum. This is in 2016. When he won a Crystal Award, and Bono was seen talking to Justin Trudeau. But behind the scenes, we hear Kevin Spacey, leader of the free world on House of Cards, was made the de facto mayor of Davos. Spacey, who also met with Trudeau along with Leo DiCappuccino, popped into Anthony Scaramucci's wine forum where the elite meet after hours at the piano bar. A spy at the Sky Bridge. They were all schmoozing. And Kevin Spacey sang to the room. He is the king of Davos. So great, moral, awesome, upstanding, loving people at Davos who only want the best for you and for you to be free. Right? Liberty, equality, fraternity.